For today's video, we're going to take a look at the specific way I like to build a recessed balcony, or decks, as we like to call them. These things can be pretty deceiving. Decks seem straightforward, but there are plenty of ways they can go sideways if you're not paying close attention. One small mistake with a level, especially early on, can throw everything off and put you in a real bind later. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through the step-by-step process I use to make sure everything stays square, level, and solid from the ground up. What you're seeing here is me snapping my ledger line. One of the most important things to figure out when starting a deck is how big of a step you want coming out onto it and what the slope needs to be. In this case, I'm aiming for a 4-inch step down from the subfloor with a slope of 1/4 inch per foot. It's important to know where that step begins. It changes case by case. But what I didn't show you is how I pulled down from the bottom of the door, added 1.5 inches to account for the plate, and made a mark. That's one of those little details that can cause problems if you're not careful. To get that same height on the other side, instead of punching a hole in the wall, the better way is to grab an extendable level. Drive a nail just under your mark. This makes up for the 1/16 of an inch the nail adds. Set your level on that nail, transfer the height across to the other side, and snap a line on the wall for the top of your ledger. Now what you see me doing is transferring that height again across the wall. The reason I'm doing that is to establish our slope. To figure out how much slope you need, you have to know what's level and the length of the deck to start. That's why I repeat the same process you use when setting your ledger line. Another key piece of info is the length of the deck, because the length directly affects how much it needs to slope. In this example, the deck is 6 feet 5 inches long. Knowing that, and that the slope is 1/4 inch per foot, it works out to just over 1.5 inches drop from level. I round that down to 1.5 inches flat, just to make things easier. That mark is going to be the top of the beam. Now, after marking down 1.5 inches from level for your slope, you've established where the top of your beam will be. The beam is what gives the deck its strength and allows it to hang over a given space. Since you know where the top of the beam is, the next step is to find the bottom. A 2x10 board, which is what I'm using here, measures 9.25 inches tall. After marking that, you use the length of the deck to measure out from the wall and mark where both the top and bottom of the beam will land vertically. The next thing most people think to do is repeat that same process on the other side. And if everything's done right, that works fine. But sometimes a step gets missed, and it causes the beam to end up out of level from one side to the other. To eliminate that issue, I like to take the mark I made for the bottom of the beam on one side and level it across to the other. That way, I know for sure the beam is perfectly level end to end, and I don't have to rely on both sides being measured exactly the same. What I'm doing here is using a torpedo level to make that mark wider, so I can pull off of it more easily. From that wider mark, I measure up the height of the beam to find the top again. Then I measure out the full length of the deck and subtract 5 inches to give myself a little room to play with when sliding the beam in. Now, in terms of giving yourself room, this deck is designed with the beam pocketed into the wall instead of using hangers. Since I have to slide the beam into the wall, I give myself extra space on the top and on the side that goes into the wall. The two things that can't change are the bottom of the beam and the overall length. The reason the top doesn't matter in this case is because it's a pocket beam. It's bearing on the structure below, not hanging off anything at the top. Once you've got the other side of the deck cut out for the beam, and you've checked that the bottoms of both beam pockets are at the same height, you're ready to start the fun part of building a recessed balcony, the installation. First, I like to pack out the spot where the beam will sit with at least 3.5 inches on each side, while also measuring from framing to framing. Next, it's time to find the length of your ledger. For that, you only need to measure inside to inside or sheeting to sheeting. Once you've cut your ledger and built the beam, this one's made from 3 2x10s nailed together, you're ready to move on. To make things easier on myself, I like to pre-install the hangers while I'm still on the ground. That way I'm not stuck moving a ladder every 2 feet, which eats up time. Since both my joists and the ledger are 2x8s, and the joists are tying into a 2x10 beam, I need to make sure the top stays consistent. So, I hold the hangers up from the bottom of the beam. That way, when the joists go in, the tops are flush with the top of the beam. You'll see me starting here with 2 of the 3 plies of the beam already installed, and now I'm working on fitting the third one. Since this is a pocketed deck and my beam is actually longer than the opening, the last piece won't slide in as is. So I start by making the beam pocket slightly bigger, cutting inward toward the building. That area will be covered by the joist running against the wall, so it won't be visible, and it'll still be structurally sound. Even after that, I was still having issues getting the last ply in. Instead of cutting the hole even wider, I chose to cut 1.5 inches off one end of the beam itself. That finally gave me just enough clearance to slide it into place. Since this deck is pocketed into the wall, I've got a layout line on my beam showing where the hangers start, and I've matched that same layout on the ledger. I line up that mark with the sheathing on the wall and nail the beam in place, knowing I've still got plenty of bearing inside the wall, while also confident the joists will run straight from the beam to the ledger. Installing the ledger is pretty straightforward. You just line the top of the ledger up with that first line you snapped for the step down from the subfloor, then nail it off. The length of the ledger should match the wall you're attaching it to, so everything stays clean and square. Now for the ribs of the deck, the joists. I start by taking a measurement for my first joist against the wall. To check that I can cut them all the same size, I would check the other side. Before putting the joist in the hanger to avoid a squeaky floor like the one in my rental, I glue the hanger with some construction adhesive. After all the joists are installed, you can get up onto the framing of the deck to finish the last few things before sheeting it. Those include driving in the angle nails through the hangers to tie the joist to the beam and installing the ledger screws. You could do both of those from a ladder, but it's a lot easier to get on top of the deck and do them from above. The last part of the deck is the floor sheeting. Because this deck is exposed to the elements, it gets sturdier and more rot-resistant sheeting than what you'd normally see on an interior floor. The slope of the deck also helps by directing water away and keeping things dry. When using floor sheets, it's usually best to snap a line. I don't do that with recessed balconies because there's no way you're going to be able to move the walls that the sheet is going to butt up against. Knowing that my layout for the joists is 16 inches on center, I can just put glue down and push the sheet tight to the walls. One thing you want to avoid with any sheeted floor is what we call railroading. That's when the 4-foot side of one sheet lines up with the 4-foot side of the next sheet. Railroading can create structural weakness, so we try to stagger the seams and avoid it whenever possible. And that's how I like to build recessed balconies here at Boardwalk Custom Builders. There are a lot of ways to build a deck, but if there's anything I missed or tips you've picked up, drop them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. I'll see you in the next video.